Hello, everybody. Delighted to welcome back to the Rugby Bunker for a second time. It's Alex Bywater of the Daily Mail. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Afternoon. Bit fatigued. Cumulative autumn tiredness is with us, I think. But one game to go, and it's been a really good autumn actually. The rugby, across the board, I think has been excellent. So really enjoyed it. One more weekend.
Yeah, we just swapped routes going up and down the M4. Didn't we? Because I saw you in Cardiff on Saturday, and then saw you at Twickenham on Sunday. So we've both done our fair share of making that trip, which is good. I think we can't slack in this period, Alex. We have to work hard, and I think we've done our bit.
Definitely.
Look, we had the pleasure of sitting next to each other for Wales against New Zealand on Saturday, which this is completely unrelated to the WRU and to the performance of Wales, the team. But I haven't been to Cardiff for a while, and I was really impressed with the kind of pre-match lighting and the way the haka was done. I found that all very, thought that was very good.
I thought it was awesome. I posted a picture on X, and kind of feels like with everything that's going on in Welsh rugby, people just want to criticise the Welsh Rugby Union for everything. And some people were responded saying, it was, why are we illuminating a haka and making the most, bigging up New Zealand? I just thought sport is about entertainment now. And the a cappella anthem, the spotlight on New Zealand and Wales in response for the haka was absolutely amazing. I've really noticed actually when the last couple of games I've been to the Stade de France, they do that. They highlight the teams doing the anthems, and I just think it looks awesome. So big shout out to the WRU for that. They've had a lot of criticism, but I thought that was really good. Alex Luff is someone who I know quite well. He's sort of the mastermind behind all of that sort of stuff. So I think he deserves a good podcast shout out for his role in that.
1,000%. I was incredibly impressed by how it went together, and I appreciate there's plenty to get stuck into the Welsh Rugby Union for at the moment, but that was a nice, that was very well done and a nice diversion before the game. Look, let's chat about the game itself before we get into the slightly knottier subjects about Welsh rugby at the moment. So it's probably a mark of where Wales are that against the very heavily rotated New Zealand side, we both watched them lose by 26 points and thought, that's actually not too bad. And there was signs of progress in terms of the attack. There were clear issues, but there were hints that things are starting to bed in under Steve Tandy. What did you make of it?
I think I'm really wary at the moment with sort of my own coverage of Wales to try and make it not sound patronising. And I think there's an element of people that might think, well, it is a bit patronising to say you've shipped 50 points again, 7 tries, and there are positives. And I've sort of wrestled with that in my reporting, and I've kind of come to the conclusion, and I'm sure people might disagree with that, but I just think that is where we're at now. And ultimately, we can say everything is dreadful, and that has happened for a little while now. But there were positives. Yes, they shipped 50 points. Yes, New Zealand made 12 changes. Yes, there were 7 tries. But thought the attack with the ball was really good. Tom Rogers, incredible stat, first Wales player and British player to score a hat-trick against New Zealand. Thought that was awesome. We've touched already on the entertainment and all that sort of stuff pre-match. So we've kind of got to look at the positives. It's exhausting just to be this is rubbish, relentlessly. And yes, of course, there are issues that we've reported on, I think, but there were shines of light. I think with the ball, they're looking really good. Really good. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Positive. The impact of Matt Sherratt as backs coach, I think, has been really good. Obviously, he's provided continuity from the summer. Daft Jenkins, I thought, was very, very good in the row. So there are shines of light, I think.
Yeah, I think delighted for Tom Rogers, because that is something that you can dine out on forever, even long past when his career has wrapped up. He should be able to hopefully squeeze a few free pints out of people for being the first Welsh and British player to score a hat-trick against New Zealand. That's a very, very nice accolade to have in your back pocket. I'm glad you mentioned Dav Jenkins. Listen, this is sort of linked to something bad about Wales, but obviously possession was a struggle. And so that meant that you had a lot of players putting in a lot of tackles. In fact, you had 5 players putting in over 100 tackles between them, and Dav Jenkins was in that group, as was Harry Deeves on his debut as well. And so I think that the kind of graft and the work rate you can't fault that. And there were touches of quality, like the way the wide Joe Hawkins ball to set up Tom Rogers' hat-trick try, Reece Sammett's finish in the corner, like, you know, there were little hints of things there. And also, as we said to each other during the game, it was a great reminder that if you get your kicking game right with your box kicks in an attacking sense, then you can create 50-50s, especially in this age of the escorting being ruled out, and so therefore you're getting more aerial contests. And Wales used that twice to set up the first try and the third try for Rogers through winning back those box kicks and getting on the front foot in attack. You're right. I think I actually wrote exactly that in my match report for The Observer, that you don't want to sound patronising. You don't want to sound like you're damning with faint praise or whatever. But Wales have been at such a low point that you have to take something out of this.
I think also, like, it's where a lot of the fans feel like that as well. So where we sat in the press box for the game on Saturday, obviously for the listeners, like, sometimes you don't always sit in the same seat as a journalist, but for the New Zealand game, I was on the end of the row, so like next to the aisle where all the fans sort of filter out at full time. And as you know, they're like inches from you when they do that, and so you can't help but hear what they're saying. And I think I put this in one of my follow-ups. It was, to paraphrase, it was one said, "Oh, that was pretty good, wasn't it?" And that was, there was positives there. So I think those that know their Welsh rugby at the moment know that things are pretty bad off the field. And, clearly, even in their pomp, Wales weren't beating the All Blacks. So given everything that's going on, you got to be happy with that, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, look, there were obvious issues. You turned to me halfway through the first half, I think it was, and just said, look, they haven't got the kind of power needed to slow the All Blacks down. And that was true. They, at the breakdown in particular, they missed Jack Morgan to win turnovers, and they missed Ollie Cracknell and people like that to shift bodies and to slow the All Blacks attack down, because then it meant that the All Blacks were getting the ball wide to Caleb Clark and Sevu Reece later on in space. And in that situation, you're facing very tricky one-on-one tackles. So I kind of, you can't pin it all on the missing personnel, but certainly Wales would have been better in that area if they'd had that. And because they couldn't slow down New Zealand's ball or win it back, you therefore had very little possession to work with. I think I double-checked before we started, but no one had more carries for Wales than Reece Sammet with 9. They had about a third of the possession in the game. I mean, obviously you're not going to be beating anybody with those kind of figures, but you could watch it and sort of understand that, which I think, again, like you say, this sense of acceptance among the supporters filing out. I had a sense of that as well. Maybe they'd seen the handicap like me at 29 points and were just surprised to see Wales come under it at 26. Maybe that was it.
Maybe they'd been on the handicap betting, to be fair.
Could be. I mean, listen, you can't rule it out. If we talk about this week against South Africa before getting into the deeper stuff, you stole a pen off me at one point and started jotting down which players Wales were not going to have available for this week, and it's a pretty hefty list. So for people who aren't aware, because it's outside the window, Wales aren't able to have their English-based players or their French-based players. So who are we talking about? Who's missing this week?
Well, I haven't got the team sheet in front of me, but of the 23 that were involved against the All Blacks, 10 of those can't play this weekend, and it's 12 of the original squad in total. The Wales have announced a squad for the South Africa game today, and as you say, that all the English and French-based players have gone, but the key personnel would be, in no particular order, Thomas Williams as scrum half, obviously with Gloucester. He'll be back playing Prem Rugby. Same with Lewis Reece Sammet with Bristol. Af Jenkins with Exeter. Adam Beard's gone back to Montpellier. Who else? Reece Carrion, Nick Tompkins of Saracens. I could go on. There's lots of them. And this sort of brings into this debate that's kind of going on at the moment, is whether the game should even be taking place, given it's the double world champions against a team that are already sort of struggling and now robbed of, arguably most of their best players, and with Jack Morgan out injured as well. I mean, it's going to be incredibly tough going. It's probably the understatement of the century. And maybe we can come on to this in a minute, Ben, but the stuff around, what Wales are really struggling with is a power game without to stop attacks when they don't have the ball. Clearly, South Africa are the most physical and the best in the world at that by a country mile. So you do really worry how Wales are going to stop South Africa. this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Wales hit by players not being available. Like South Africa have said goodbye to a number of players who have either gone back to Japan and a couple of their props from that incredible performance in Dublin as well. Bowen Venter's back to Edinburgh, Thomas du Toit's back to Bath. So they are. The difference is that South Africa's depth at the moment is just astonishing, and they're still going to have available a number of frontline starters. And the question is, I guess, if you're Rassie Erasmus, is it really worth rolling out your kind of gun Springbok players for this contest? And I know that sounds really tough on Wales, but I just don't see the point. I think you are better off blooding younger players, giving a lot of the players who featured in Rome another go if they're available. I don't see the kind of value in hammering a Wales side and are going to be nowhere near their best because of the absentees. And right, it does make you wonder about the whole validity of having this test match in the first place outside the window. We know why it's happening. It's happening because of the income that it generates. But at the same time, you're not exactly getting a fully authentic Wales against South Africa fixture. And so I think that might not be on people's radar now, but I think when you get to half-time or 60 minutes on Saturday and South Africa are up by whatever they're up by, then maybe people will be agitated a bit more by this.
Yeah. I would be surprised, as you allude to there with South Africa's selection, I would be amazed if Rassie Erasmus picks like a gun 15. Like last autumn, Wales played South Africa. I can't remember if that was outside the end of the window, but he made lots and lots of changes. I think that was their last game of the year. So I would imagine guys like Ethan Hooker might play. So yeah, I think hopefully they'll be kind on Wales. I think the off the top of my head, I think the score last year was something like 45-10 or something of that. I'm not quite sure if you've got that to hand, but it wasn't like a proper mullering.
Yeah, it was in that range. I was actually there for that, and I cannot remember for the life of me. I want to say it was something
memory like a goldfish.
You were very close, 45-12, and if I remember correctly, I'll try and check this. I feel like they pulled away South Africa quite late as well, as in it was not that it was tight by any means, but they kind of piled on points in the final throws of it, which made it look even worse. Is that right? But yeah, they kind of scored a couple of late tries, and actually Wales got a try at the end to make it look slightly better. This goes without saying. I know Wales have crept up the world rankings a bit, crucially before the World Cup draw, didn't they? After Georgia's loss to Japan, that kind of shifted things around at the start of this week. So Wales are going to avoid a group of death at the World Cup now, which is something. But we're talking about such a big golfing class, and I feel like that's a good positive time, Alex, to just pause for a second and then dive into the nitty-gritty of what's going on between the WRU and the regions. Okay, Alex, goodness me, where do we start with this? So I think the very latest development was kind of the Dragons and the Welsh Rugby Union taking their very unproductive meeting public, right? After the Dragons walked out of it 10 minutes into what was supposed to be a 2-hour meeting or a 3-hour meeting about strategy.
Certainly longer than 10 minutes, yeah.
Can you fill me in on kind of the latest in this I was going to say convoluted
soap opera
system? Soap opera is good. This ongoing process, let's be kind, of trying to whittle down 4 regions into 3.
Yeah, so pre-autumn, that's what the Welsh Rugby Union confirmed. Initially, it was going to be 2 teams from 4. Now the proposal is to go to 3. How and when they get there is not definite at this stage. What they'd like to do is get to which teams are going to survive by the end of the year. Speaking to sort of a few of the people involved, both sides of the fence, that's going to be tricky. You know, having clubs walk out of meetings after 10 minutes, you know, makes for great headlines. But I think the reality of that, I mean, clearly it doesn't take a rocket scientist to suggest that if that's happening, there's not anywhere close to an agreement on how these things are going to proceed moving forwards. And at the heart of it, certainly for the Dragons, as they made clear in their statement, is around the rugby control. So I would say that it's relatively complicated, but to put it in, I guess, some fairly layman's terms, essentially what the WRU are saying is, we want control of these three teams and we want to control the rugby operations, which is contracting players, coaches, basically how the rugby is going to work. And the Dragons owners, I think quite correctly, I would say, have said, well, we want to get behind this proposal and we want to come to the table, but we're an independent rugby club and we don't want to cede total control of our rugby operation. And herein lies the crux of the matter, really. Are the teams prepared to give that up? And then clearly the Dragons aren't. So how those meetings are going to come to some form of mutual agreement in the coming weeks and months, I'm really not quite sure, because clearly there are two opposite ends of the spectrum. And I don't really see how there is a middle ground on that. It's either the clubs run the rugby or the WRU runs it. I'm struggling to see how there will be a middle ground, but I guess that will come out in the coming months. But I guess to sum up, it's still tricky to see how they're going to come to this idea that there will be a consensual agreement amongst all stakeholders by the end of December, which is what they want.
Yeah, there's this element of the WRU wanting control over players, coaches and support staff, and yet still asking these kind of directors to pump in the money, like agreed sums over the next few years. You can see why, if you were an investor, why you would be slightly concerned about having very little control over how the club is sort of run from a player perspective, and sort of ceding that to the Welsh Rugby Union. You mentioned that end of December deadline, and I feel like that feels increasingly unrealistic. And then also, I think Dave Redden said recently about how it would work in terms of even getting everything signed off with the URC and all the kind of commercial stakeholder hoops that you have to jump through. I mean, realistically, we're talking end of 26-27 season, aren't we? Where I think everything could potentially be signed off and it goes down from 4 to 3. To briefly catch people up, there was chat in the summer that it might, I think originally they wanted to get it down to 2 regions, didn't they? And now 3 is this solution, for want of a better word, having had this whole saga play out incredibly publicly, to the quite understandable distress of players and staff involved at the regions who were wondering what the kind of future holds. I picked out a detail when I was reading about this before we were having this chat, that they want to have 3 regions, right? So 1 in Cardiff, 1 in East Wales, and 1 in West Wales. So as a man based in Wales, Alex, what realistically does that look like in terms of locations, and which team do you think is the most at risk here?
Well, that's a big question. Clearly, at the moment, there are 2 teams in West Wales: the Ospreys based in Swansea and the Scarlets based in Llanelli. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that if there's only going to be 1 in the West moving forward, when there are currently 2, one of those is going to be at risk of going. So that's either the Ospreys or the Scarlets. Now, we're kind of reversing a little bit, but before the autumn, when we had that big press conference at the Principality Stadium, that was kind of the headline thing. Basically, one of the Ospreys or the Scarlets is at risk. And Richard Collier-Keywood, who's the chair, basically said that's not technically the case, because any team can apply for one of the 3 remaining licenses if they get to that stage. But that makes things incredibly complicated. And the reality is that, for me, we don't know what's going to happen, but for me, one of the 2 West teams is at risk, and I don't think we can say at this stage one of them is more likely than the other to be gone. If I had to say, and this is based purely on what I think will happen, I think the Ospreys would be the most at risk. A couple of reasons for that are that they don't own their own ground. Unfortunately, you can't get away from the fact that their supporter base in terms of ticket sales and attendances has plummeted since the pandemic, really. It wasn't great before, but it's plummeted again since then. So I think that does place them at risk, unfortunately.
I think there's been a hell of a lot of empathy for players, right? Because having to, like we said earlier, having to kind of prepare for 4 test matches, and having to also in the back of your mind think about where realistically in 18 months' time you might be, in terms of if your team will still be there. We went through this in the Premiership, didn't we, covering Wasps and Worcester and London Irish, and the reality is some players do end up moving to new clubs. Like you tend to read about the high profile players, don't you, obviously, but there's a whole other number of squad players who either do pick up contracts somewhere not necessarily on great salaries because they're taking what is available, or who fall out of the game entirely because the loss of their team, or in this case their region, is sort of the signal for them that it's time to do something new, and there's something pretty desperate about that. I know you're very well connected there in Wales. What have you sort of heard from personnel and staff on that front?
Well, I think it's a very tough time for all of them. And I think, we talked a bit about Wales's on-field performances. I think they've done pretty well on the whole, and they deserve credit for the way they've managed to perform and park the off-field stuff, because it doesn't seem like, certainly externally from our position in the media, that it's affected the performances. Look, we all know where the quality of the team is, but I don't think they've performed necessarily lower than their ability. Now, don't get me wrong, the Japan game was a little bit disappointing in terms of the performance, but I think Steve Tandy, who's come in as head coach, has done a pretty good job of sidetracking everything that's going on off the field and getting them to deliver on it. But there's a whole multitude of issues that are going on, and this season, we're coming up to Christmas, and now, aren't we, where traditionally recontracting takes place for the following season. In this job, we speak to lots of agents, and sort of my understanding is that the recontracting, especially with stuff around R360 that may not be happening, is happening even earlier than usual this season. It's been going on for months already. So there's a number of players in Wales that are out of contract and they're currently playing in the autumn that in 6 months' time don't know where they're going to be playing. And if you speak to the players, if you speak to the coaches, that's a really awful situation. And unfortunately, in Welsh rugby, it's something that they've become really used to. I think what's interesting is that the WRU have said they will honour existing contracts, which is great. And they've hinting that clubs can offer players new contracts. But if you were a player that was being offered a new contract by a club that may not be there in the future, I would, I'm no rugby player, but I would imagine it's very difficult to sign that contract if you've got something, especially if you're fortunate enough to have something concrete on the table elsewhere, i.e. potentially or if you're fortunate enough, potentially in France as well. And there's quite a few examples of that. Jack Morgan clearly is one on the back of the Lions. He's a man in incredible demand. We've seen what's going on with him in terms of potential interest from elsewhere. So Wales will be desperate to keep him in Wales, but at the moment, it looks like it might be tough.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're talking about Jack Morgan without saying his name out loud until you did. He is the obvious one, isn't he? Where it's so clear how much playing for Wales means to him and playing for the Ospreys means to him, that you imagine that if he did make that move, it would be particularly difficult for him. But at the same time, the possibility of a multi-year contract with Saracens, the kind of security that comes with that, not to mention the on-field potential of a move like that, and joining a back row with Ben Earl and one of Juan Martin Gonzalez or Theo McFarland. I mean, the appeal there is very, very easy to see. And look, it's desperately tough. It's desperately tough all round. And I do wonder whether I wonder if you're of a similar point of view, just to kind of wrap this up. I wonder if you agree with where I'm at, which is that I don't disagree with the decision to potentially get rid of a region or to reduce the regions down. I think that was probably something that needed to happen in the long run, but it's the process and the way that it's been managed that's the issue. That's the kind of cause of so much stress for these players and how it's been handled. It's going to be a stressful situation anyway, but it probably could have been handled in a far better way than the way it's publicly played out.
I think the first thing that I'd say in response to that is it was never, ever going to be straightforward in any stretch. So initially they wanted to go to 2, now it's 3. But, cutting one team or 2 would have been incredibly difficult in any scenario. So it was always going to be a tricky situation for the Welsh Rugby Union to undertake. The process, the consultation period has attracted a lot of criticism, especially from fans, for being, a bit of a loaded gun, so to speak. On the whole, I think it's been done okay. I wouldn't say well, and I wouldn't say it's been awful. I think they've been relatively upfront about it, but it's the mechanisms by which they're going to get to this end goal that are still unclear. And to be honest, I'm not even sure they know how they're going to get there. And that is the problem, because the uncertainty that's enveloped the Welsh game has been going on for 5-6 years. You could say obviously longer, but really since that 2019 slam, when everything was obviously honky-dory on the field, but there was the rumour of the merger between the Scarlets and the Ospreys in that Six Nations campaign, I would say that since then, there's always been something off the field. And I think people now are just sick of it. And I would happily admit that, obviously I've been reporting on it for, probably quite a lot, definitely all of that time. And now it is kind of proving a bit tiresome. I think everyone just wants the end goal, but we still don't know how we're going to get there. And, I really wouldn't rule out it not happening. It would be the most Welsh rugby thing ever if we went through this whole scenario of going from 4, then to 2, now it's 3, and then staying at 4. And, people might hear me say that and say, think, that's a bit like tongue in cheek. But if you can't see how you're going to get there, I think it is more than realistic that might actually happen.
So it would be fairly extraordinary, but
then everyone would say, well, what a waste of time. And yeah, that would be correct, but we'll see. But watch this space. I would not be surprised if through the rest of this season that they can't get an agreement on going to 3, and then they kick the can down the road. And now the WRU leadership is unequivocal that they will get there and do it. And, if that's their belief, then good on them. And it's clear that something does need to change because the national teams, both men's and women's, have been struggling for a long time now. Normally in Welsh rugby, people can't really agree on what pint they're having before dinner or whatever, let alone which team's going to go. So yeah, we shall see. I don't think it's going to be a swift resolution anyway.
Well, it's a good job you've loved reporting on it for about 6-7 years. So
yeah, but it'd be another 6.
Fantastic. Just what everybody wants to hear. Alex, what a pleasure. Thank you for coming on and unpacking this in far more detail and far better than I could have done on my own or with Charlie. So yeah, appreciate it. And I will see you very soon. Thank you, mate.
Cheers. No problem.